people's perception and experience with the market, thinking the traditional route is going through title companies. If title companies don't solve it or they can't provide clear title, then there's too much risk because my money is not protected. When people start looking into what title companies actually insure on their policies versus what they don't, you realize that there's not a lot of protection there. A lot of times title companies get it wrong. If you're able to educate yourself enough in what they look for and how to solve whatever problems you come across, well, then you realize there really is no risk. Lead generation is key with regards to assessing and determining what properties are worth chasing. Negotiation comes with time and learning all the ins and outs and what are the potential problems, pitfalls that someone could encounter and how to mitigate those. Lead generation is also incredibly important when it comes to knowing how to assess what is even worth chasing.
On another deal, you made $400,000 on a single deal in the mid-cap real estate space. Was that genius or just knowing what others missed?
I would say it's knowing what others missed.
Ryan McDonald, I've known you for about 7 or 8 years, and you married one of my closest friends from growing up in college's sister, and now you've been my business partner for a lot of years doing hairy real estate deals, and our listeners want to hear about those, so that's why you're here today.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm glad to talk about it.
We'll have a conversation in this room instead of all those rooms today. So welcome, Ryan.
Well, thank you.
Good.
I'm excited to be here.
I know where we're headed. I get to see everything you do. You see what I do. Like, we're involved in all this stuff together. But folks out there, before we get into that, folks want to know who's Ryan. How'd Ryan get here? Why real estate? What's that look like, Mr. McDonald?
Well, kind of going back to just initial framing of, how I am. So my family came here from Chile back in 79, I believe. And they came here with the suitcase, lived in an apartment, sold off everything they had in Chile. So they lived in an apartment, in a one-bedroom apartment, sleeping on the floor.
Wait, so you were first-generation American then?
Yes. I guess you could say, because it was my parents and my older brothers were born there. They came here.
Yeah, you're first-generation American.
And I was born here. So it was, they gave up everything for the American dream to come here and, seize the opportunity that was available here. So, growing up with them, growing up, I was very, I guess you could say, sheltered and or reserved. I wasn't a very outgoing individual. I always dreamed of accomplishing the American dream, which was, nice house, cars, big family, freedom, all that stuff. But, I learned over the course of growing up, kind of being a little bit sheltered, a little bit coddled, I didn't quite have the work ethic and the study ethic, I guess you could say, in school to set myself up for that in the future. So as I went into college, it took me 6.5 years of going continuously, summer schools and everything, to graduate with a bachelor's. So a joke that my brother says that I like to copy is, I graduated thanks a lot instead of magna cum laude or anything else. So, paid out-of-state tuition because it took me so long with so many hours.
Yeah, once you get to a certain point, then it goes to that tuition.
Yeah. So then I met my wife in college. My last semester was her first semester. We were dating, and then we got married. And, I used to do a job that I didn't like, environmental science.
God, I can't even see you doing that at this day and age.
No. And although it was a fun job with the camaraderie, due to the camaraderie with a lot of the coworkers, I was traveling all the time. I just did not like it. Then I switched over into the corporate world and went, desk job, cubicle. Didn't like that. Was realizing I wasn't good at playing the politic game. I also I lacked a lot of confidence in myself to really pursue the corporate life. And so I noticed that I was kind of stagnant. I wasn't growing. And then, sure enough, my first daughter arrived, my first child. And, when I see her on the table after she was born, I'm realizing someone else is dependent on me and I can't just coast through life.
Ooh.
So that was a big changer for me of I need to figure things out and I need to do something and I was also in a job that I really just did not like. It wasn't a bad job. It paid fine, $55K a year, but I did not like it. I didn't like the people. I did not like being in my own silo in an office with no one to talk to, and there was just no culture for me. So that's when I decided to Google. It was what are ways that people get wealthy? Because I was realizing with my daughter, I was seeing her 15, 20 minutes in the morning, and then coming home, feeding her dinner, seeing her 30 minutes at night, and that was it. And I'm I'm not going to go the
One of
rest
the
of my
things
life
you
like
said
that.
is the American dream to you was also have a big family.
Yes. So now I have 4 kids, and they were all born within a 5-year window. So they're all pretty close together. So, you know, some people tell us that we need to get some hobbies, you know. But,
You got one.
yeah. So, so once the oldest was born, I remember sitting at my desk hating that job, and I was going, you know, how do people get rich and essentially be wealthy enough to have freedom to do whatever they want, spend more time with their families? So I think I Googled on the internet, and I found an article, I think it was on Mr. Money Mustache, and it mentioned the 3 ways people become wealthy are investing in stocks, starting and growing a business, or investing in real estate. And I think the real estate tab seemed interesting because it tied to Bigger Pockets when Bigger Pockets was new, relatively new, I say, but I came across it in 2015. And then I just went down that rabbit hole of reading their initial guide, and that gave me a basis, listening to their podcast, and then realizing, you know what, this is something that I could do, and I'm just going to go full bore into that. So spent about a year listening to podcasts, reading books, and then I spent another year just trying to put things into practice and trying to figure it out. So
yeah, that's a hard part. You don't have the guidance, and you're just trying to piece things together.
Yeah, and it was a lot of it was my mental barriers that I had on myself, as well as some things. You know, you grow up in, I would say, some traditional kind of Hispanic families of, you have more of a bleeding heart mindset. You know, you always want to do things for others, and you always have that mindset of, you know, the world's looking out for you. Came to realize no one is looking out for me.
That's not true.
I have to be dependent on myself. I can't depend on anyone else. So it caused me to kind of, you know, pick myself up from my bootstraps and put myself to work.
That's an interesting part of this that I've never heard before.
Yeah. It took a lot of growing up mentally, and, you know, I just had to get out of my old ways. So I think I've changed a lot of my mindset from where I used to be, and now I'm completely opposite of what a lot of my family members may still be today as far as how they view life in general.
I can see that even in my limited scope of your life, and we're going to talk about that in a little while. But so I can kind of talk about your journey into real estate, because I know you were searching through that, sending out mailers, and while at the time you were working doing Heineken direct sales to the point of sale locations. And as you're driving through all those different locations, you're seeing these dilapidated houses, and you're starting to connect the dots, kind of. Mm-hmm. I'm sending out mailers to these people. If that house looks vacant, maybe let me get a hold of them. And I think this was your first deal when you called me and said,
yeah. So
was that the first one?
No, that was the second deal, the one that I ended up giving you. The first deal was that one in New Braunfels where the guy agreed to sell it. And I had offered him $100,000. My thought was it was probably worth $150 as it sat. And then you're coaching me. The guy said yes, and I'm like, holy shit! I don't even know how to fill out a contract. So I call Brad to get in touch with you because he told me you were doing
one of my friends that I grew up with.
Yeah. And Brad is my brother-in-law. So I call him, and he's like, hey, my buddy Logan is doing real estate in San Antonio. So someone finally told me yes on a yellow letter I sent them. And I'm going, okay, now I don't know how to fill out a contract, so I call you.
You're that puppy dog that's been chasing the cars, and you catch it, and you're like, shit.
And I remember I was pretty straight to the point, because I remember getting on the phone, and I'm like, hey, Logan, this is Ryan. I'm married to Callie. I know we haven't really spoken in the past, but I know you're doing real estate in San Antonio, and I'm trying to do it here. Someone just gave me my first yes, and I don't know how to fill out this contract. Can you help me? That was literally the first thing that I said to you, and you're just kind of caught off guard. But you helped me through that. That deal ended up falling through.
I remember the guy ended up falling into a guardianship because he had psychiatric problems.
Exactly. Yeah, he had I guess elderly care was kind of watching him. They had due to lack of mental capacity, which I couldn't tell from my conversations with him. Yeah. And he had a young girlfriend that was there with him, and
it
turns out
she was taking some of his money or something.
She was trying to take advantage of the situation to take funds from him. And anyways, when it came down to closing day, I think the night before, he had gone to the corner store, and then on his way back, he was trying to get into the wrong house, thinking it was his.
That's right.
So they called the police.
Wasn't he going to buy cigarettes or something? I remember cigarettes.
Yeah, I think he was going to buy cigarettes and maybe some sodas or something like that. But yeah, I think his mind was going at that point. Like I said, during our conversations, I never noticed it. He seemed normal. He seemed lucid, but apparently he was already kind of being taken care of by elderly services. So. Yeah, that deal blew up, and then that second deal which I brought to you ended up being my first deal, was Yeah, Heineken days, driving different streets on the way from account to account, writing down vacant houses, sending out letters. And the guy calls me one day. I remember sitting in the playroom, and I'm sitting there working on the computer, and he tells me, you know what, I want $65,000 for this house. And I'm going, I know it's in a really good area, and I'm pulling it up in the appraisal district, and it says 188. And I'm going,
I think this is the deal.
And I'm like, I don't want to waste my time. So I'm like, okay. And so tell me more about the house. All right. And so you want how much again? And so I had him repeat 65,000 3 times. And I was like, okay. So now I know this is the number he's got, and I'm not just misunderstanding him. So then I call you, and I'm like, hey, can you meet me out there? So you were kind enough to meet me out there. And I was like realizing I'd already spent a year trying to do this, and it was just taking forever. I didn't know what to do. I knew this was a much bigger project that I had that was coming down the pipe that I didn't know how to work. So I saw you. I remember we were walking down the sidewalk, and I'm like, look, man, I'm looking for a mentor, someone to help coach me and bring me along this road. I was like, you can have this deal if you could just be my coach. I think it's a good deal. It looks like it'll be a good deal. I was like, but I need someone to bring me along faster. And that's kind of how we got into our first deal.
I remember that was a crazy one. I still tell that story today, and always gets attention. And at the time, it was one of the bigger deals. You know, most of what we want to do is just buy something with problems and turn around and resell it, not really do a lot of construction, a lot of other stuff. And that was one of the bigger ones. That was, I don't know, $80,000 or $100,000 net. But I also remember, like, you were working at it, and at that time, it was me and Bill, and then we had an assistant for, like, administrative stuff, and we didn't have much infrastructure. But I remember thinking, gosh, like, you know, if I could share something with this guy and he is interested in working at this like this, there might be something more. So because you'd called, you know, within a short amount of time with multiple deals, I thought, man, all right, let's try this one. And that deal ended up working out really well. Mm-hmm. And after that, I thought, okay, maybe we should work together. And I remember specifically, because I was somewhat early in the investing career, I remember people that I'd get deals from would try to go work for like more experienced investors, and those investors would essentially have them find the deals, and then they would take them from them. They would offer them a $5,000 fee, or I don't know, they would always kind of screw them a little bit. I just heard that all the time from the people that I would call my colleagues and equals in the inexperienced newbie world. And I'd only been in it for a couple of years at this time, and I remember thinking, gosh, dude, I don't want to do that because no one sticks with these people. It just doesn't work. And that kind of sucked anyway. So I remember thinking, how can I make this work? And people ask, like, how do you choose good partners? And I remember thinking, well, let me just work with this guy for a while. I can't remember the exact conversations, but I remember my like broad stroke thoughts were, let me just work with this guy for a while and see what kind of dude he is. Does he have a work ethic? Is he sharp enough to like be able to figure this stuff out? Am I okay being around him? Because if you're like an abrasive dude or like a knothead, like I wouldn't want to spend weeks around you.
Yeah.
So I thought, let's just work together and see how it works. And after working through that for a year, you were really picking up a lot. And I'm like, man, I think this is pretty good. I think we should make something of this.
Yeah. No, I remember. So I remember that deal, and I think it was the first way you kind of tested me, because I was like, look, I'm going to give you this deal, but I want someone to coach. And then you offered me.
When I saw the numbers, I'm like, I'll take it.
Yeah. And I remember you were like, you know what?
That was expensive.
I was like, I'll give you a couple options. I was like, if you wanted to get out now at the front end, I'll give you $5,000. If you want to take a ride with me, I'll give you $10,000 on the back end. And I'm sitting there going, you know what? I'm in this to learn it. I don't care about. I don't want just the $5,000 and then be stuck where I am. I was like, I want to show that I'm in this for the long term haul, and I want to learn and I need to learn. So I was like, you know what? I had a good paying job, and my wife had a really good paying job. So the $5,000 wasn't going to change anything for me. It was more of
but the experience,
concept.
That was more important than all the dollars.
Yeah, and I remember it took us like 3 months to monetize this thing, which was fine, but it was, pain in the butt with the needy seller having questions, and you just wanted to be on the phone for an hour every time I'm talking to them.
Oh,
but
I remember going to his house. Oh.
Yeah, so I remember just going, you know what, this is the test for me to prove that I can do this. So yeah, it was 3 months, and then sure enough, I think it was right when that one closed, I locked in another one, and then another one. I think within that 6 month period, I'd gone from doing no deals to I think 4 or 5.
Isn't that crazy? A year. I hear this from so many people. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I were looking for a deal for a year. I'm so instant gratification oriented. I don't know if I would have kept with it, but you just kept at it, and then once you got over that hump, it was boom.
Yeah, and that first 10K referral that you gave me was like proof of concept. I'm like, okay, this does actually work. It took me a while to get here, but it works. So now I'm gonna rinse and repeat. And so then we got a mortgage foreclosure on I think it was Slippery Rock was the name of that one.
Oh yeah,
Slippery did that one. And then I picked up a couple lots in Canyon Lake, and I was just, with your coaching and guidance on how to navigate the situations, negotiate them, et cetera, that accelerated my growth.
On this saying some of these things, I know you know them, but I'll say them for the benefit of other folks. As you're trying to build something bigger than what you could do on your own, you can hire people that can be an employee, or if they're a very high producer. For me, I value the productivity over anything because that's where we earn. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, okay, I can pay this guy an arrangement or something like that, but if this guy owns half, his share ain't no bigger than mine ain't any bigger than his, people never feel slighted with half. That's a good number. And I thought, over time, if I can offer him enough things that are worth him being around, he'll be happy with what he gets, I'll be happy with what I get, and we can build something. And I remember thinking, all right, it's very aggressive that young in a career to say, let's be a partner. Yeah. But I didn't just jump in. You meet someone at a bar on Friday night, and Monday morning you're signed a partnership. We worked together for a year. We kind of felt comfortable with that and said, all right, man, let's just cut it down the middle and let's go. And that was my first real operating partnership that was productive. It lasted. Yeah. So I encourage people to consider things like that instead of having a revolving door of employees.
Yeah. No, I'm thankful for it because, I think I attribute a lot to, not only your patience and knowledge with me, because I'm sitting there calling you all the time, depending on you to help answer questions that I don't know how to answer. But I think a lot of it was, me being open to being coached. Yeah. So I guess one of the things I could say about myself is that I'm a pretty coachable person. So I'm always open, receptive to new ideas, figuring things out. And I think you seeing that in me, as well as my desire to try to make this work, was beneficial. But yeah, that 1 year trial period I think was good because you really started to get to know someone after doing deals that long. Uh-huh. Is this going to last? Are they going to break away? Are they going to get more greedy and want 100% of the profits, or they want to build something together? What does that look like?
Something a lot of people don't think about is when, yes, you're sharing the money, that's the first thing they think about, but they don't think about sharing the brain power because, we have a third partner. It wasn't just me. It was me, him, and you. We have 3 brains to work on stuff. Other things that people don't think about are administrative infrastructure, legal, professional services, all that kind of stuff, engineering, how you can bring that into the fold. The finance part of this business is a real pain in the butt because you can't use traditional debt. You have to be cash heavy. So, our third partner does a lot of the finance stuff, and it's really nice to be able to have that stuff happen so each person can do what they do best. And frankly, I'm a huge partner believer. I don't own 100% of anything, not even my house. That's community property. Everything is shared with partners, but I don't really care to have 100% of it all because with that kind of collective brain power, it's so much better. It always is in my mind.
Yeah, no, I agree. And one of the sayings that, I've heard, I think you've mentioned it before. It's you can go fast alone or you can go far together. Yep. I'm not trying to take 100% of the profits of every deal because, one, I know I also assume 100% of the risk and 100% of the responsibility in getting it solved. With the partnership, I'm in it for the long haul to grow true wealth, and then also have people to go on, take the ride with me, so that way we can increase our chances of success.
I agree. So Ryan, you operate in a space that most people call risky, but you're making 50 to 100 grand a deal net. What are they not seeing?
So I think a lot of it is just people's perception and experience with the market of thinking the traditional route is going through title companies. If title companies don't solve it or they can't provide clear title, then there's too much risk because my money is not protected. And when people start looking into what title companies actually insure on their policies versus what they don't, you realize that there's not a lot of protection there. A lot of times title companies get it wrong. And so if you're able to educate yourself enough in what they look for and how to solve whatever problems you come across, well, then you realize there really is no risk. There's some inherent risk because you don't know everything that you don't know. But I'd say with the dirty title stuff, it's almost less risky than flipping a house because on a house, you're messing with walls, you've got a lot of money out, and you don't know what's behind the wall once you tear it out. And so it can lead to significantly more damage. Whenever I'm doing a title problem property, I pretty much have the entire picture laid out before me before I even spend the first dollar. So I already know what the steps are to solve it. Now, granted, there are some unforeseen items that pop up on rare occasion, but overall, as long as you understand the process, I would say there's little to no risk in the situations.
So you mentioned risk, but from the outside, it looks like you're taking wild chances, distressed titles, legal messes, but your margins say otherwise. What are others misunderstanding about risk that you're not?
I think risk is just your perception of what you don't know. So in this instance, if I view risk more as I've got a lot of money out tied up on this property, making a 20% return. If the market adjusts, I've just lost, any equity that I did have. And now I'm trying to avoid drowning and coming out of pocket. For me, my level of risk, yes, there may be some risk, but if I've got low dollars out and I've got a pretty good understanding of what the situation looks like and how to solve it, then my risk is much lower than someone that is trying to flip a $250,000 house and they're in it for $200,000. And now the market's adjusting. Now they're having to sell it for $200,000, come to the table. They've lost $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 on a deal paying closing costs. Whereas I might be into a deal worth $100,000, but I'm only into it for $20,000. Even if I have to drop my shorts and just give the property away, I'm pretty sure I'm going to at least get my money back, if not, still make some money.
Everybody's looking at the upside. I hear you talking about the downside.
Mm-hmm. So there was a property I recently did in Graham, Texas. We bought the interest from two heirs. They owned it outright. They both agreed to sell. I think we were all into it for about $35,000. And when I'm looking at this thing going, after I clean it out, this thing's probably worth $120 based on what I'm seeing. Now, granted, it is a slow market. It's further out from a MSA, so I know it's going to sell significantly slower. And maybe if I have to give some concessions, maybe it sells for $100K on a quick fire sale. So pull that trigger, bought the property. When we're going through selling, I'm getting multiple offers at like $80K. So now that's telling me that the market isn't what I thought it was.
Yeah.
So I'm going, okay, well now I'm pretty much 30% less than what I thought I could sell this property at, but I'm still double what I'm into the property. So no matter what, I'm able to just drop the price and say, I don't care, just sell it because I want to recover my cash and take my profit and move on to the next deal.
That's a great way to explain the upside potential, the downside risk, and why it matters.
Yeah. So the downside risk was there's no way I'm going to make less than what I bought this. I'm not going to sell this property less
You
than
ain't
what I bought it
losing
for.
money for darn sure.
Exactly. Now it's the only unknown is how much money am I really going to make?
Yeah. So Ryan, in the mid-cap, on another deal, you made $400,000 on a single deal in the mid-cap real estate space. Was that genius or just knowing what others missed?
I would say it's knowing what others missed. So that deal was brought to me by two different individuals. One wholesaler brought a portion of the family, and then my brother, who was learning the ropes based on what I taught him, was bringing another side of the family, of which with total, I think on this property was something
like a dual
like 30,
JV deal.
It was a dual JV deal, and it was like 30-something heirs on 3 adjoining properties that were side by side in Austin. And even then, they only brought, whenever I acquired the interest, I think it only counted to 35% of the ownership. So there was still 75% of the ownership that was unaccounted for that we had to figure out. But we were getting them for so low, it made total sense to do it.
What did those offers sound like? How are you explaining to somebody that you can really only give them $500 for a share of a property?
So when talking to these people, they always think that property is worth more than what it really is. So I focus on, okay, what is the condition of the property? What is the true value of the property? And I tell them, you know what, this property, if it's fixed up in good, if you can sell it and fix all the title problems, at best you'll get X. One
of the things I like, though, is you're being honest, because some people say, well, they told me it wasn't worth that much and they didn't give me that much. No.
Yeah.
It can be worth this if you do it all yourself. So it's clear disclosure, and you allow them to make the decision to take less because of the problems they know about.
Exactly. So when I framed it to these people, I'm like, look, you could, at best case scenario, you clean up the site, you spend $20,000, $30,000 cleaning up the side of these 3 homes, and at best you'll list each of these homes for $300,000. I go, but you only own 10% or less. So if you took $300,000 times 10%, the best you will make is $30,000 in this deal if you sold with all partners. Now, Well, let me
And
correct
fixed all the
that.
problems.
$90,000 on this deal because it's 3 properties. And I say, but that's best case scenario, and you still have to round up another 30-something people. It doesn't include legal costs, your time and effort. You don't know what you're doing.
Like a damn
Your attorneys
basketball
aren't going to
team.
help you. No one else is going to help you unless you want to pay $500 an hour. By then, you've just consumed all the equity you got. It's like, you're not going to get it solved. I can solve it for you, but it's going to be for significantly less than your $90,000 because now I'm going to put myself in your shoes and I'm going to go solve this problem for you.
That's it.
It's like, and I know how to do it effectively and efficiently. And so that is what gives me the opportunity. However, you can either walk away with this deal at some point for nothing, or you can walk away now with some money in your pocket and move on.
A little bit of something's better than a little bit of nothing. I listen to critics of this model who have a completely different look because there are a few bad actors out there and they exist in any space. They think everyone's a bad actor. They lie, cheat, and deceive. And what they don't realize is they're not in the middle of these conversations with a good person who's in a business that is a tough business. They miss all that part of it.
Yeah, a lot of it is these people have been trying to figure these things out for years. They lack the knowledge, they lack the financial means to resolve it, and they lack the time. So, if you're missing all of those things, you're not ever going to solve this problem. If someone's willing to step in and just pay you for it, then that's got to be you got to have some sort of value for them to be able to go make money on all the time and effort and money that they're going to spend, as well as risk, because they're paying you up front without any guarantee of return on the back end. And
this is a risk-adjusted decision.
Exactly. So the way I'm looking at it going, okay, I have a good idea on what my opportunity is, what the potential exits are. And if I'm going to take on this problem, I want my time and effort to be worth anything. Not only my money part needs to get a return, but my time and effort put into the deal, as well as my expertise, also needs to generate a return.
I think that's a good way to say it. I think a lot of people, especially early on, they start wholesaling or just sourcing deals for themselves, and they're afraid to be honest. They're afraid to disclose that they make a lot of money because the people that are selling it to them, they're afraid that they're going to not want to do the deal. It's going to fall apart. And there's a risk of that happening some, but I think that causes folks in this business who are in the real estate business and the sourcing side that are new to be less transparent and honest because they're afraid. But when you come to the reality of it and you connect the dots on your own and understand it, it makes it easier for you to just be direct and honest, which also makes for a better transaction. And ironically enough, it makes for more trust from the seller, which newbies think the opposite.
Mm-hmm. That deal took me about 18 months to resolve, almost 2 years. So the way when I tell people, I'm like, look, I'm an experienced investor. In order to resolve this problem, it could take me 2 years, and I already know significantly more than what you already know. And I have the resources to do it. If you're coming in without the knowledge and experience, how long do you think it's going to take you? Do you think you have that much time? Do you think you have that much resources to solve this on your own? Likelihood is that you don't, and that you'll hit a wall at some point and then give up because it requires too much time, too much effort, because you're starting from zero. I'm starting from 90 as far as my education level and knowing how to apply it. You're starting from zero, so you have to start the education process to figure out what you have to do, and then you have to have the funds to hire an attorney or figure it out on your own.
All that. You practically gave away your first deal almost for free, almost $100,000 margin. But how did that decision cause you to make millions of dollars?
So I would say that decision there was realizing that, I need to find someone that could bring me along faster than what I could do on my own. You always hear in podcasts and in books and everything else where, it's important to always find a mentor because they can compress years and decades worth of education into a smaller window, which now lets you capitalize much faster. So for me, that was the switch in that particular deal was you were able to compress what probably would have taken me another 3 or 4 years in educating into a shorter window, and I was able to monetize it on the way. So I might have traded a $100,000 deal on the front end, but I've made multiples of that on the back end.
That's a fair way to say that. So many folks are skeptical if something seems like larger than life or too good to be true, and rightfully so, they should be because there's a lot of BS out there. But if you can assess the person and realize it's good, it's fair. I hear Alex Hormozy a lot of times say you're going to pay for the education either in the lost revenue or paying for the education, but you're paying for it one way or the other.
Exactly. Yeah, lost revenue or even opportunity costs. Like if you could make $100,000 now by paying a mentor $30,000, it takes you a year to do that versus you try to figure it out on your own and it takes you 5 years to make the $100,000. What could you have done in that 4-year difference?
Oh, change of life. Yeah, absolutely. You said lead generation is the key, but negotiation is the kill shot. What's your secret at that table?
So lead generation is key with regards to assessing and determining what properties are worth chasing. But if you don't know how to negotiate a good deal on those, negotiate yourself into a good position to get a good deal on those particular deals, then that's I think they both work hand in hand because you want to find the opportunities that make the most money, that give you the biggest return on your time and effort. Mm-hmm. But if you don't know how to, you got to know how to negotiate them effectively in order to get a good enough deal. So, I think negotiation comes with time and learning all the ins and outs and what are the potential problems, pitfalls that someone could encounter and how to mitigate those. But if lead generation is also incredibly important when it comes to knowing how to assess what is even worth chasing.
Yeah, lead generation, you got nothing if you don't got it. But once you get a deal, if you don't know how to talk through it, well, you got nothing there too. So
yeah, you could be landing on a gold mine type deal, but if you don't know how to negotiate it effectively and or solve the problem on it, then it'll be up for someone else to take on at some point down the line.
I feel like negotiation includes a lot of trust, candor, skill, leverage, all those things combined. There's so much going on with a skilled negotiator because you are building trust, but you also have a goal to show them that you're honest and transparent. But your goal is to probably get the best deal for you. So you have to press towards that without being a shady person or misrepresenting. And it's a skill, man. It's a $1 million skill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of people, when we negotiate, sometimes they have a good idea on what the property is worth. Mm-hmm. But as I start breaking down the time and effort that's involved, what their percentage actually comes out to, and is it worth their time and effort to try to squeeze every nickel out of that situation, a lot of times people tell me no, but they always come back later going, you know what, he's right. He's willing to solve my problem.
That's just education. You're just educating them to information or prerogative they didn't have before.
Exactly. But it's also negotiating with them as far as like, this is why my offer cannot exceed this amount because now I've got to do X, Y, and Z. I've got to be tied up in this deal for several months. If I do this deal, that takes me away from another deal that I could do that I can monetize faster or that's easier to solve. So, if I'm willing to take on this situation, it's going to be at a price that makes the most sense for me.
Fair. So let's talk about that first deal you got closed, the one that we did together, the one that got signed in the bathroom stall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the guy whose house we sat down at, who we think might have been like a sex predator or something.
Yeah. So
let's start from the beginning.
Yeah.
How'd you stumble across this?
So it was going from one account to another in my Heineken days. I wrote down the address, and it was right here in the King William district.
When you say Heineken, that's when you were a beer rep.
Exactly.
Doing point of sale sales.
Yeah, I was doing point of sale, direct sales to the independent convenience stores. So I'm right here in Southtown or in the King William district. There's one of my accounts. It's a small mom and pop gas station. And as I'm go from account to account, I'm just taking different roads and I'm just writing addresses down. I sent this guy a yellow letter. He calls me, I bring it to you. And, when originally he wanted 65,000, but then he pivoted because he always held rental properties. And his mindset was if the rent can cover the taxes and the mortgage, then that's all I need. For him, cash flow didn't make sense because he was in it for the long term and he was already an old man. But I remember he owned it in a trust. I think it was a family trust or a living trust. And when we met him, he said, I think my son is the trustee, and we pushed him to get us a copy of the trust so we knew who the signer was. Well, we got in touch with the son. He was in Houston at a halfway house, I guess you could say, because he was in jail for indecency with the child, I believe it was.
Wasn't it his own child or someone else?
I think it might have been with his own child.
I can't remember now.
So, he was in Houston. We're trying to get this contract done. I have someone, we realize that he's at HEB. He goes to HEB once a week for his halfway house to go pick up groceries, and that's the time where we can go ahead and meet him to sign a contract.
And I remember the issue was we need to get the contract signed because there's going to be a lot of work. We knew there might have been a missing trust, so we'd have to deal with that. But in order to have a meeting that was approved by his halfway house, You had to submit, apply, do a background check. It takes weeks. And in this case, we're like, how do we do this otherwise?
Yeah. And this all took us 4 weeks, I think, from the initial conversation to getting this guy. And sure enough, we end up meeting him in a bathroom stall at the HEB because he had to do it in secret from the officers that were there monitoring everyone while they got groceries. So signing the contract, sure enough, we get it back. We're finally ready to go. We get a copy of the trust and realize he actually was never even needed to be involved in the deal.
Oh, that's right.
Because the dad was his own trustee. And so we spent all that time and effort going around that, that nonsense. So, sure, yeah, we get it under contract. And the owner pivots and he's like, you know what? I want a rent-ready property. So then it's like, okay, well, let's go find something that still fits within the $65,000 window that we can then just trade with him. So,
and that was a long time ago, but it was still even tough in San Antonio. It was like a 3-bedroom brick house that had a foundation that was fucking busted. I remember that.
Remember they expanded the room over the patio. So when you go from a big thick slab to a 4-inch, patio slab, the entire side of the house was breaking. But I remember you picked it up from a wholesaler, I think it was. So they got a small fee. And
I forgot about that whole part of the deal.
Yeah, the agreement was, we'll get this house into rentable condition. And then as we were going back and forth, they wanted more work done, and we told them, well, we can't do that because that's flip condition. You wanted rent ready. So we had the foundation adjusted. I think I remember it was like 24 piers, and then we had to fix the tile, patch the holes in the ceilings that messed up from the cracking, and then we did a deed transfer, and it was
swapped
it was all insured through title.
That's right. I remember we were asking title, how do we do this, and
yeah.
Because they needed the insurance.
Yeah, title helped us out, and then I think you turn around and just listed that property after a clean out and then you sold it and made, I don't even know what you made on it, but my guess is it was probably 6 figures. But yeah,
I think it was a hair under. Yeah, that was the part that I just thought we were going to buy and resell it, and that was kind of in the early days where I was just really getting that down and really liking that model and not having to do a lot of construction. And then we had to do that swap. If that deal would have been half the value, I don't think we would have done it. But, we've done a lot of swaps around here, and you've got to go find a property that matches them while this is under contract. It's actually a lot. Mm-hmm. And then we had to do, repairs. And of all repairs, it's foundation. That was more than you think. But when you step back, really we just bought an okay house, did some repairs through contractors, and swapped. Because the margin was big, and in the early days, that was top margins that we were touching. So for sure it was worth it. I'd still do that deal today.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you look at it, it was like you double your money on a house flip. It was as if we bought that same house that we fixed up and we expected to make double on it. Except we just gifted it to the guy. The real profit wasn't really much on that property, most likely because of the area it was in.
Yeah, that was like a net zero.
Yeah. But then in the end, he wanted it as a rentable property, but he didn't end up renting it out. He just put his daughter in it.
That's right. Oh my gosh, I remember that witch, dude. She was construction manager, even though she wasn't, because she worked in an apartment rental office or something.
No. She worked at the mobile home park that they owned, but it was only 11 units. It was in the ghetto and in terrible condition.
She was out there
slumlords,
bossing around.
Exactly.
And then didn't she have a weird boyfriend?
She did.
Pestering us.
Yeah. He was involved as well. So this deal had a lot of people involved on the opposite end, but we ended up getting it done.
You know what, though? When you step back and think about that deal, it took us 3-4 months, something like that. But that's higher than the median household income in the United States, the net profit on that deal. That's one way to look at it. And the other way is we probably spent $60,000 or $70,000, somewhere around that, or maybe a little bit more to buy and do that deal. That much capital was at use. But you still made $100,000. That was $100,000 lick in total.
Yeah, and I like to say that was in a 3-month window. Imagine if you did that every quarter. What kind of income can you generate from that?
Yeah. That particular deal is a great example of so many things of not a lot of experience, a pretty clean transaction, generally speaking, huge margin, great return. That was an awesome deal to have as a first deal, really.
Yeah. And then the second deal ended up being that one on Shiny Slippery Rock that we flipped. And, we still made, I think we made $50K on that one.
Oh,
but we approached
the one that had the lake access?
Yeah. We ended up, we shouldn't have flipped it. We should have just listed it, because I think when we ran the numbers, if we would have just listed it, we would have made more than what we made on the flip after giving up concessions and the cost of the rehab and everything.
You live and learn.
Yeah.
Hundreds and maybe 1,000 transactions later, that matters to us now. So
still made money. It was fun. Learned a lot. That's why I don't do flips.
Let's talk about landlocked property. We had a really fun landlocked deal. Mm-hmm. Do you remember where that came from?
So there's a couple, because we had the one in Conroe, which was the 6.5 acre
That's the
deal.
one I'm thinking of.
Okay, I was making sure it wasn't the other ones that we got, the 1 acres, where we had to deal
those
with
stories vary radically. But let's talk about, because it's so mesmerizing. People say it's landlocked, you have no access. There really is a lot of access, and actually, we should talk about both of those landlocked deals because they're both on opposite ends of the spectrum of how to make them work.
Yeah. So that landlocked deal was the first one. So that was brought by a wholesaler. He had this group of heirs that were interested in selling it, but it was landlocked. When we're looking at it on maps and street views, there's an adjoining parcel that had a road dead end at the adjoining property's front yard, and then the other side was the back of a subdivision. But that entryway also dead end, and there was also a utility line easement and an oil line, a gas line, pipeline easement through it. So access on that side was not going to be possible because you can't do any improvements over the easements.
That's right.
And then I think we were also in the flight path as well. That didn't quite matter in this situation, but yeah. So everything that we're seeing, we couldn't find right of way access on the property. The heirs were behind on taxes. I think they were at risk at losing them. So we ended up cutting a deal where we bought the heirs' interest. I think it was for $16,000 or $17,000 on that landlocked 6.5 acres in Conroe. And then the wholesaler, we paid him $5,000 for bringing the deal. And then we realized, let's go ahead and try to figure out what we can. I think wait.
I remember, though, the ordering was really important because we were going to buy it without title insurance. And I remember this was the very first landlocked deal I think I'd done. And we were in a discovery phase at this point. And I remember thinking, get us a little more time on the contract and let's dig and see. And I remember it was teed up in title, and we ended up finding the easement. Not me. You found the easement while we were in title, and we already had our contract. So we actually unlandlocked it.
Yes.
While we were in title and then just closed.
Yeah, because the easement was poorly indexed, and it was indexed through misspelling of the names of the grantors and the grantees. And I think I had just done variations of whatever the name was. I can't even remember the name at this point, but I think I just stumbled across it just by mistyping the guy's name that was the grantee. And so that's how. Yeah, so that's how as I'm reading the legal description, I'm like, oh, okay, this matches, because it was a long meets and bounds description because it wasn't platted. So that's how I ended up coming across the easement. So we went ahead and closed, and that's when we got the survey done. And we sent the survey company the easement to make sure that they recorded it. And sure enough, it ended up being a 60-foot right-of-way easement across the front of the property, which happened to cut halfway through the neighbor's adjoining property.
That's right. They had what appeared to be the neighbor. So the neighbor had two parcels that they thought was one, but this easement cut through it.
So where the road dead ended,
that's right.
That was just because the county didn't maintain it beyond that point. But really, the easement carried all the way through into our property.
I'll never forget when we were out there, that lady was a rip. She had horses out there. She says, I said, we're going to take this fence down. We're going to build a road. She goes, if you take that fence down and my $1 million racehorse gets out, I'm going to sue you. And I said, well, I'm telling you now, you better take it down because you don't have a right to put that fence up. And she goes, I said, we're going to do it next week. She goes, well, you call me before you do it. And I said, this is your notice. I'm telling you now. It's happened next week. She was madder than a hornet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember she wanted that property because she kept telling us.
That's my property. I was supposed to get it.
Yeah, I was supposed to get it. I've been trying to reach the family for years. And I remember you kind of give her that little smile and was like, well, if it was your property, you would own it, but we own it. And I knew you were trying to, you said you were trying to pick a fight a little bit just to see how aggressive she would get to know what kind of fight we're going to be. Yeah.
That's a strategic thing. Like, I don't like to be a jerk, but there are times where you say, man, I'm going to test this resolve because if there's a nasty fight, I need to have it now before we spend a lot of money or know that it's that, instead of putting a lot of capital in here, being all the way down the road, and then right before we sell it or whatever, we're real pregnant with this thing, got a lot of cash in it, then a big fight starts. I remember testing her, seeing like, how far is she going to take this? And I remember we sent her all of the docs. We printed them and gave it to her when I was out there.
We gave her a copy of the survey.
Yep, she gave it to her lawyer, and her husband came back playing more nice because I think she was too mad to do it.
Yeah, because she felt like that was her property. She was going to own it at some point. And then, even a side note, I noticed that they were also trying to adversely possess the adjoining neighborhood's the spare land. It was like almost a half acre that they had fenced around and they were using, trying to adversely possess the neighborhood's property.
It's crazy how people just think they start to take ownership of things that are near those or familiar to them, but they got no legal right.
Yep.
You know, that deal, after doing a couple more, I started to connect some dots in my head and realized of landlocked property, probably maybe a little less than half of them actually are not landlocked. There is an easement or an access or something in the land records, but it's poorly indexed. It's hard to find. So half of the landlocked property isn't really landlocked, but until you really dig, you don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I just stumbled across that one just by accident. That's how we ended up finding it. And
what were the numbers on that deal? Do you remember?
I think we bought it for 20. We were into the road construction initially for 25.
Oh, and then the road
Then they got
washed
hit with
out.
a bunch of rain, and then we had to put in another $10K in repairing it. So I think we were all into it for, what is that, $55,000?
Mm-hmm.
And the neighbor was trying to buy it from us, the same one that we were just fighting with.
Oh, yeah.
And they thought it was worth 60 because that's what the appraisal district had. And we said, no, the numbers are showing upper 100s based on comps. And she was like, you'll never get that.
You'll never get that.
Yeah, you'll never get that amount of money.
We got that.
So sure enough, yeah, we ended up selling it for like $165,000. I think net was just shy of six figures, which was my goal, but I think we netted like $98,000. So I was excited, but also not too excited.
This is like, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, and 2 deals within the first 24 months are nearly 100K net. Like going from a good job that you had that was probably making that a year, you're able to knock that off in a deal.
Yeah.
When folks tell me I'm going to get into this kind of real estate, but I'm scared, it's too risky, I'm just baffled because I'm 10 years beyond those decisions. But if one deal can make you that, and your first deal was a net like that, and you didn't have a lot of experience,
yeah.
I'm just shocked when people just can't see it. But
No, and I remember when I was doing that, my whole intention was to get out of my job and do it full time. So it took me from that first deal another year before I quit my job. But I knew when I quit, because I was still working from like 7 to 4 every day. And then I was doing the real estate at night, and I was still picking up some deals.
that's hard work.
But when I quit, I already had some deals lined up, and there was some like towards the end of the cycle when they were going to sell that I was like, okay, well, even if I leave my job, I still have the income coming in these. But I remember my salary at the time was like 85 or 88 grand, which was salary plus bonuses. And whenever I left, that was my annual salary. And then when I left, within 6 months, I was able to basically mirror that. I mean, I think I made like $86,000 in the next 6 months just off of a few deals, and that was my entire year salary. So then it just kept growing exponentially from there.
I remember you kept saying, man, I'm going to quit this job. And I was like, man, don't quit that job yet. And one day you're like, I'm quitting this job. I'm like, all right.
Yeah, because it was that Slippery Rock house, and I was like, okay, well, it's going to flip. I think we were already under contract, so I'm like looking at it going, okay, that should net us 50-something K, so I'll get about 25 of that. That'll buy me some time so I can focus on getting the next deal. And my wife was making, lower 100s at that point. So we had plenty of funds to be able to weather the storm while I figured this out and went full bore into it.
And I remember having this I was nervous about it because I felt like, although you're making your own decisions, I still felt this high level of responsibility and accountability. Like, oh my gosh, I'm kind of asking him to leave what is so familiar to him and consistent and come over here. And it's worked for me, and I think it's going to work for him. But I still thought if this doesn't work for him, I'm going to feel like it's my fault. And I was scared about that. It was a weird thing.
Yeah.
Now I make the comment the other way, like, I can't believe you wouldn't see this to people, but
yeah. I mean, like I said, I think for my situation, we had good income from my wife's job. We had these deals coming through, so we were going to be okay, and I could figure it out. If I needed to, I could go back and get another sales job if I had to. I figured there wouldn't be too much of an issue doing that. But if I was going to take a stab at it, that was the time to do it. And it got scary a little bit because once I quit, I remember I was in your office. You let me have that little cubicle desk, and I'm sitting there just 8 hours a day making calls, and I got no one for like 3 weeks. And I'm sitting there going, oh God, did I make the right decision? And then sure enough, like that towards the end of that third week, I got someone to say yes on a little lot in Canyon Lake. And I'm looking at the numbers. I'm going, okay, we could probably make like 25 on this deal, which at the time it was just still, I bring the deal, you bring the money. when we sell it, you get your money back and we split the profits 50-50. And I'm like, we're into this deal for $1,000. We're assuming the taxes, we'll be all right.
Good deal.
So yeah, but then I was like, okay, so that one hit. And then sure enough, another week or two later, another one hit, and they just started slowly compounding like that.
People always say, if you got problems, call the leads. If your wife's not happy with you, call the leads. If you're tired, call the leads. Mm-hmm. If things aren't working, you need them to change, call the leads.
Yep.
It's funny how that works.
It's true. That's what kind of reinvigorated me this past year, was just sitting down, calling the leads, and I've been able to, grow the business even further this past year.
We have cycles, every human, every employee, every partner, every business all has cycles, and you go through that. You're in the beginning, it's like, oh my gosh, this is all I can think about. And then you get good at it and you get experience, and we all get like, I don't know, bored of it, tired of it, whatever. And it all goes like this. But, those are the next rendition or phase of an entrepreneur's business is, how do I grow this? How do I keep interested? How do I make the best decisions I can? All those things. And that's where you are, I think, right now.
Yeah. But yeah, going back to that Landlocked deal, like I said, that was a huge deal, and I think we got into one right after that one, which was the other one. I mean, we still have it, but it was two vacant 1 acre lots in Canyon Lake, and that story was crazy in itself. And that one we didn't have an easement because it was poorly supposedly platted property.
Didn't you find that one on the tax foreclosure list?
Yeah, it was on the tax foreclosure list. I reached out to the owner. They didn't want anything to do with it. So I offered him $500, but not realizing he also came from money. So it wasn't worth his time to mess with me for $500. Mm-hmm. And then we had you call as a completely separate person and offer him a little bit more. And then I remember you mentioned that when you were signing, he's like, yeah, this Yahoo tried to offer me $500. Not even worth my damn time.
That Yahoo owns half this deal now.
Exactly. But yeah, that one was...
How did that one become landlocked? Because that's a big part of the story.
So it was originally a large tract, and it was owned by a bail bondsman, and they owned several tracts around. And what they would do is they would parcel out these properties and then deed them back and forth between him and his business partners for whatever reason. I don't even remember why, but I remember I learned this, is that bail bondsmen, if they ever own property, sometimes it's behind on taxes, but they don't really care because they use it for their business as far as getting loans for
collateral for bonds.
Collateral for bonds. So, they use it to operate their business, so they don't ever really care for it. That's why I see a lot of bail bondsmen own properties that are vacant around town, and they really just don't care because it helps to fund their bail bonds business. Mm-hmm. Well, this guy was a bad apple, and they're typically difficult to deal with. And he had put a hit out on, I guess he was getting audited by the IRS. So he had put a hit out on his business partner and on the mailman for delivering the mail, as well as the IRS agent that was in charge with auditing.
How did you find that out?
It was a giant article in the newspaper. Apparently, everyone knew about the guy because it was from the early 2000s when all this happened. And yeah, he had put a hit out on his business partner. It actually went through, but the business partner didn't die. I think the business partner got shot like 9 times and survived. And then the guy spent 15 years in prison.
And that's how title changed. Now I remember this part.
Exactly.
He went to prison, but beforehand he deeded all these assets to his girlfriend and his children.
And his business partner. This was the one owned by the business partner that got shot.
Basically to hide assets so that he wouldn't lose them to restitution or forfeiture.
Exactly, but the business partner refused to give him the property back.
He's
so
like,
he
fuck
tried
you
to
guys.
sue. It ended up fizzling out. So when it's going to the tax sale, we reach out and we offer to buy it. And, it came with a meets and bounds referencing a platted subdivision, but the plat didn't exist. So it looked like it was just someone conveying it for no reason with no legal access. So then when we bought it, after finding that there was no plat, we had to sue that same guy who had just put a hit out on his partner and served 15 years. We had to sue him for access to the property. And we had to do all the education of, okay, this lot came out of which parcel, and then we have to go the shortest distance to the road. What does that route look like? And that resulted in
in Texas, you have easement by estoppel, implied easement,
easement by necessity.
And what's the other? There's a fourth one.
I can't remember the fourth one.
So these aren't statutory. These are common law, meaning these are results of the Supreme Court ruling because other laws weren't clear enough. And those 4 common law remedies more or less cover pretty much most of the landlocked problems, landlocked problems. So generally speaking, the way it works is it's not illegal to landlock property, but the law basically says you can't. So if you do that, there's no like repercussion, like someone's not going to hurt you, but there's a claim against you for the access or for the easement. I remember when going through this process, we looked around everywhere. We interviewed neighbors. Like someone showed us like a partial drawing of a plat that was just drawn but never recorded. And I think that guy, the neighbor, was saying, hey, I bought these lots from that same guy. And he said he was going to file this subdivision and didn't.
Yeah.
So that's why that road never happened. So now remember, we went back and tried to the dude didn't own the land. It was owned in a corporation his girlfriend owned.
Yes.
So we were serving her or trying to communicate with her, and she was like ruthless, just hell no.
Yeah, she was dodging service any which way. We ended up having to get a
process server.
Yeah, ended up having to get she was denying who she was. We ended up getting a process. We had to get a copy of her ID, which somehow we got a copy of her ID that we then used for the process server to identify her to be able to serve her the papers. So
that's right.
Yeah, we ended up using that in order to get valid service. And at that point, once she was served, they had to come to the table.
And we offered didn't we offer like 15 grand or something?
I think we offered like 10 grand, but we ended up paying them 5 grand because they said, no, you don't have a claim. They thought we didn't know. And after we put together the entire case on how the property came to be, where it came from,
and we did a summary pleading. So we were going to go get a summary ruling instead of having to litigate the whole thing.
Exactly. So once they saw that, they realized that they had no case and that they were just going to spend legal fees as well as probably have to pay for our legal fees.
Lose.
They went ahead and agreed to just receiving a payout from us and cooperating.
That's right.
Which in reality, we probably shouldn't have even paid them because they were going to lose anyways, but they got us to the finish line faster.
So I remember talking through that saying, I'll spend the same 5 to my lawyer to go win and get this result, or we'll spend the same 5 to you, but we'll negotiate an easement and we'll get the things we need. And instead of just getting a ruling for an easement, we'll get a much better easement. And it's probably going to be faster this way than instead of letting the wheels of justice, which turn slow, complete it. So on one end of the spectrum, from a landlocked tract, you can go find a poorly indexed or just easement that's somewhere out there. There's that. So it appears landlocked, but is not. And then on the other end of that spectrum would be filing a lawsuit, getting a judgment or a settlement, and now getting access to the land. So land that is locked there's no real true way to establish value. It's what someone will pay for it, but no one will really spend much because you can't build a house. You can't use it for use or enjoyment. So, I mean, landlocked parcels are like, it's worth 5 grand, it's worth 10 grand, it's almost worth nothing.
Yeah.
But when it's unlocked, that one that we bought for, 20 grand became worth 160. This one, I remember we thought, because of the location, we thought the couple acres would be worth $500,000. It hadn't sold for that. I think now we think it's worth $250,000, but we might be in it for what, 75 grand or something?
Yeah, 75. But even that, we shared that cost with the other party that joined us into the lawsuit.
Oh, that's right, the neighbor.
We're probably into it for less than maybe half or maybe a little bit more than half.
So we're in the thing for less than 50. It's worth a couple hundred. It was still a 4 times markup. So it still was a good deal.
Yeah, and it's in a growing area. I got a call from McCoy's looking at maybe wanting to build a facility there in that area, but they were going to need a little bit bigger parcel. But they might negotiate with the individual. I think come to find out, that same lady that was dodging service, supposedly she recently died.
Really?
So, yeah,
How'd you find that out?
I think someone had told me here a few months ago that it sounds like she had died. So now it might be something where they'll look at unloading, or there might be some other issues going on with that owner.
Interesting. Maybe we should look her up.
Yes, maybe that turns into another deal. We can buy all the adjoining acreage.
I remember that was part of the deal too. We made a multi-pronged offer. One of them was for the easement. One of them was to buy the remaining tract because it was like maybe 100 to a large tract.
Yeah.
I remember we made an offer to buy that.
Yeah, we offered to pay for the easement. We offered to buy their land at a certain price, or I forgot what the third term was, but they didn't want to part with the land, I guess, because they're still operating the bail bonds business. And
really? I didn't realize
they're
that.
still in operation. They're right there, right next to the jail here in Bexar County.
Wow, those people were nuts. All right, so we got time for another deal. Listeners love the deals, and they love hearing how they worked, how much you made, what you solved, because that's, to me, after you learn to find deals, that's the meat and potatoes of this. That's the chess match that gets you to the finish line. That's the last dot you connect to bring the value from a little bit to a lot. So what would be a deal that you've done in the last 24 months that stands out to you above all of them?
Probably one of the fun ones I'd recently done was last January, and the reason why this one was interesting is because I was out little money out of pocket, but I was able to turn it around in like 35 days. So it was a property going to the tax auction in Travis County. It was a small little lot, and it was going to the auction. I'm sitting there trying to find the title history, trying to find the original vesting deed. It's hard to find it because it's like a meets and bounds. They named this lady. The CAD or the appraisal district has notices going to this guy named Frank Barron. Name was spelled differently than what the CAD had the mom's name at. And then I'm looking at the lawsuit, and the lawsuit has different people named in the lawsuit. So it has like Michael and Douglas, and I'm TLOing them, and I'm seeing no connection with them at all. So I'm sitting there going, okay, what's going on? So I reach out to the two that were named in the lawsuit, and they're like, I don't think my mom owned that property, but if you want it, I'll go ahead and sell it to you. That's fine. I'm like, I'm pretty sure you own it. So luckily, I had them signed up on a contract, and I was ready to pull the trigger that next day. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to do some extra digging. So sure enough, somehow I was able to find, because I was looking at the title history, it was deeded from the lady that owned it from another company, and I started looking at all the deeds that they transacted, and sure enough, I guess they had done like a property swap. She had deeded them a property, and they had deeded her this property. So when I went through and I found that previous property, I found the history of where she resided at the time, which helped me confirm that it was a different lady with the same name. And the lady I was looking for, she went by 4 different iterations of her name. And the other lady was standard, but I realized, I was like, okay, the county has identified the wrong people to sue in this case. So I found some of the heirs. They wouldn't respond to me. And I was like, you know what? I've got to go to Austin. I'm going to go knock on their doors because they're not answering my phone calls. They're not returning. It's coming up to the sale. I think it's probably $150,000, $200,000 lot. And it was going to auction for like 18 grand. And so I go door knock on this lady's door. She was like, oh, wow, you're really persistent, And I'm like, yeah, I'm just trying to resolve
I've been dodging your texts for weeks.
Yeah, exactly. So I get her, I talk to her, lay out the entire situation. She lays out the family situation there. The lady died in like 2015. There was like 5 or 6 original kids. 2 of them had died and left some other kids. And the family was splintered. They just didn't communicate anymore.
Wow.
And so I agreed to pay her. She was actually living with her brother. So I knocked out 2 heirs right then and there to sign an agreement to sell to me. She put me in touch with the other ones. And I slowly got everyone agreed to sell to me. So from the initial time of engagement to closing with all 9 heirs was like 7 or 8 days. And they were all separate communication. So I think I was total out of pocket. I want to say to the heirs about 14 grand, 12 to 14 grand. I can't remember exactly. So it took me about 7 days. I paid off the taxes. So now I'm into this thing for, I think, 40 grand. And then I reach out to John Taylor. John Taylor is one of our friends up in Austin. He's an attorney, but he also does developments, condo plats, et cetera. So I reach out to him and I'm like, hey, I've got this property. I want to sell it pretty quick. I go, you interested in it? He's like, yeah, let me look at it. Sure enough, it bordered right next to a church. It's in the Montopolis area. And he's like, yeah, I'll take it. What do you want? And I say, you know what? I'll do 160 for it. And I go, I think if I list it on MLS, I could probably get 200. But if you work with me and buy it out within a few days, I'll do 160. He's like, you know what? I think we can do that. So sure enough, we wrote up a contract, went to title, cleared title, and within like 5 days he closed at the 160. So from initial conversation to buying and selling the property was like a 35-day window. So
That's fast, very efficient use of capital.
Yeah, made like 100 and actually on the taxes, I didn't even pay the taxes because when I reached out to the taxing authority, I'm like, hey, you notified the wrong heirs. You need to pull the sale. They went ahead and agreed to pull the sale. And I was like, I've got everyone involved. And they were like, well, in good faith, give us the $2,000 towards the taxes and we'll put the rest on a payment plan over the course of a year. So, which my intention was to do that. So I just paid the $2,000. So I think I was total out of pocket 14 grand and total revenue back was $112,000 on top of my $14,000 investment.
There's another point that comes to mind. So many of these tax lawsuits have problems because they're old ownership. If there's no mortgage, there's lots of equity. Sometimes you have multiple owners about half the time. The other half, it's not like that. But an ad litem attorney is hired to or the tax law firm does the research about the owners, and they don't always do a great job. They get a title report, they do some work, but my gut says about 50% of the time they've got errors. So when you've got a pending foreclosure, sometimes you can call and prove up a point, and they'll pull it from the foreclosure sale and give you some more time. Sometimes you can file a restraining order, but because it's a municipal or like a county, government entity, a lot of times, about half the time, you're not as successful in getting the restraining order like you would be in a mortgage foreclosure. And the other time, like you mentioned here, is you just give them a payment plan, pay them a small amount of money, and move forward.
Yeah. So that's what I use on a lot of mine now is instead of just coming out of pocket completely, I'll put on a payment plan knowing that I'll sell this thing before I ever have to shell out another dime. So that mitigates my risk on the back, my cash out. So that way I'm able to do more deals with the remaining cash that I have. But it's, I might pay incrementally more on whatever interest that's accrued on the balance that's left.
But you're using someone else's cash to do your deal.
Exactly. I get to save $50,000 back in my bank account.
The tax office is financing your deal.
Yeah. Tax office maybe charges me another $1,000 or $2,000 in interest, but I was able to use that same $50K to go buy another property to make me double another $50K.
When you're looking at the big picture there, it makes sense. Some people say thousands in interest for a couple months. It's stupid. Well, use your opportunity cost is another deal of 50 or 100K. So that's a wise business decision that in the moment, a lot of folks wouldn't catch.
Yep. So,
dude, well, this has been fun. I know you got a trip. I got a couple of questions on our way out. So the story that you've got is fun and interesting, but when you look at it on the back of being a first generation American, spending a lot of your childhood in another country, all these things, like they compound, what's unique about who you are and where you've been. So if you were to go back and talk to 10 or 15 years ago, Ryan, who wasn't quite as responsible, hadn't had that eye-opening moment of meeting your first child, did all that, what would you tell the 10 or 15 year ago younger Ryan?
So one of the things that I've learned that's kind of helped me grow as a person personally, is, realizing the sacrifices that and I've had this conversation with my brothers and my mom, and, they understand my view, although they don't kind of see it that way. The way I look at it is, they sacrificed a lot to come here. And if I do like a lot of people and it's just kind of coast through without applying myself to the best of my ability, then I look at it as if, I'm squandering the opportunity that they provided to me and the sacrifice that they took.
Yeah.
No one wants to go live out of a suitcase on the floor in an apartment for years and go from having a decent corporate job to cleaning hotel bathrooms and, apartments and things like the motels. No one wants to go do that. They do that with the hope that the sacrifice will lead to something else in the future. And so when I had this conversation with him, I'm like, look, I felt like something switched that said, if I didn't do everything I could to accomplish what you wished we would all accomplish, then I have not lived up to the expectation and the sacrifice that you laid out. So, and
how did they see it when you told them that?
So they were like, they were surprised. They were like, you know what? I don't agree because I feel like the opportunity was still great and everyone still has good lives.
Wow.
But they were like, I could see that, they were like, I could see why you would say something like that. So that was, I would say, going back to my younger self, telling them, if you continue to just coast and not apply yourself and take full advantage of all the knowledge and the capabilities you have before you, then you're just squandering on this. You're basically pissing on the sacrifices that they made to give you the life that you wanted, that you could only dream of.
Wow. Well, that's exciting because I believe you've come further than your parents when you got here. And while they may see what you're doing differently, they've had different experiences and they're different people. So they'd see it differently.
I think they view it as, the American dream of having your home, a loving family, stable job, income, things like that. Well, that's the American dream because, in Chile at the time,
Can't have that easily.
It was Pinochet was the dictator and the country was in turmoil. So they wanted to come here for stability, for the
All
American
they cared about
dream.
was stability.
Exactly. Stability, the American dream to accomplish something. And so that's what they're, now my dad died early on. He was never really able to fully see that. Now he still had a great family, still had love. And so he didn't fail in that aspect or anything like that. But I think secretly he always wanted to accomplish more professionally and do something. And he never got the time because he passed away early. And my mom's done well for herself now after all the years of going, because when they were there, they had bought properties that she had rented out, and then years and years later, she was able to sell them, and it helped kind of catapult her retirement a bit.
Yeah.
But that was millionaire by accident, I guess you could say. But she always knew buying property was important. But for me, like I said, if they were willing to take that sacrifice, then I need to do the most I can now in order to make it, and for me mentally, to make it feel like that my family did it for a reason.
I like that. Now I want you to talk to people that are listening that are headed towards this, maybe want to get into it, maybe you're dabbling in the distressed real estate business. What's the most important thing that they need to know? What do you tell them?
The most important thing, I guess they need to know is that, it is hard work. They're not going to be able to shortcut their way through it. They're going to have to put in the time and effort to increasing their knowledge, to putting themselves out there, opening yourself up to rejection and just getting out of your comfort zone. It's something that you have to do. And if you don't take those necessary steps, you're going to struggle much more along the way.
I like that. That's good too. All right, Ryan, thanks for spending your time. I know you're heading out of town to have a fun weekend, so I appreciate it.
All right, thank you. I appreciate being here. Hopefully people take a lot away from this story.
They will. This has been one of my favorite ones so far. I like it.
Good.
All right, let's get out of here.
All right, thank you.
My commitment to you is to deliver the most interesting, messy, and profitable real estate deals on earth. And in exchange for that, I only ask that you subscribe to this podcast and share it with a friend who can benefit.